Welcome back to AM Agenda. Let's go straight to our panel now. Joining me from Sydney, the Small Business Minister Craig Emerson and the Liberal MP Michael Johnson. Thank you both for your time. Michael Johnson, firstly to you. We know the opposition has commissioned this independent analysis of the white paper, but what was your initial reaction to the plan and the reaction of your colleagues as well?
Well, good morning, Ashley. I'm pleased to say that the Coalition and Malcolm Turnbull are going to give this very strong consideration. I think it's perhaps more to the side of the Coalition than most people would have expected. So we're not surprised by it. But I think that a lot of work needs still to be done. I mean, remember the government's had 12 months to consider this with the full resources of government. So we're going to be very constructive, we're going to be a very good opposition, and we're going to do what's in the national interest.
Well, Barnaby Joyce seems to have already made up his mind. He says today this scheme won't do a thing to save the environment, but will cost jobs and investment. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, look, Barnaby's a great Queenslander like Craig Emerson and myself, and he'll do what's in the national interest. He's a very constructive member of the opposition. He does what's in the interest of the state of Queensland and Australia, and I'm more than confident that he's going to do what's right.
But Michael, you must acknowledge this is going to be a huge challenge for the Coalition to come up with a united position on this.
Look, I'm not so sure about that. Our guiding principle is always going to be what's in the national interest. The most important thing is jobs, the most important thing is economic prosperity, and we'll do what we have to and say what we have to in the interests of the country and in the interests of those companies that might lose jobs.
Well, Craig Emerson, the Coalition support in the Senate is now pretty crucial, isn't it, considering that the Greens are furious over the targets set yesterday?
Well, the leader of the National Party in the Senate, Barnaby Joyce, has said he totally opposes this. Just yesterday, in an opinion piece, Andrew Robb, one of the spokespeople on it, described a 2010 start-up date as reckless and a schmozzle. Today, they have a different position. We won't know what position the Coalition has on this from one day to another. So Michael talks about the national interest, that's welcome, but I fear again that Malcolm Turnbull will operate in his own political interest and not in the national interest. He needs to rein in Barnaby Joyce. I don't mind at all the idea of them doing modelling, that's reasonable, but they can't seem to hold a position from one day to the next.
Well, Craig Emerson, that means that getting this through the Senate is going to be a pretty difficult task for the government, isn't it? If the Greens are offside, of course, as we all saw yesterday, and people within the opposition look to be doubtful as well.
Well, it could be hard, but Michael's just assured us that Barnaby Joyce will fall into line. We'll just have to wait and see. But what we've done here, Ashley, is chart a course right down the middle. And of course there will be some Green groups who are very, very strongly opposed to what we're doing. Some sections of the industry in Australia are not particularly happy, others are a little bit more relaxed about it. But what we've had to do is find that middle course where we are making a very substantial contribution to reducing our own emissions here in Australia and taking a leadership role in the world. And I understand, you know, when people say, oh, but you're not doing as much as Europe. Well, in fact, we are on a per capita basis, and that's been the criticism, that we're the third or second biggest per capita polluter in the world. On a per capita basis, we're doing more than Europe.
OK, well, Michael, just getting back to the opposition stance on this, is the opposition still opposed to starting this scheme in the year 2010?
Look, Malcolm Turnbull and Andrew Robb have indicated that the starting date will depend on what's in the national interest. If we think that the date and the timelines that the government has set are in the interest of the country, then you know, we'll look at that very carefully. But equally, if it's not...
That's a pretty clear shift in policy position, though, isn't it, Michael? It's quite a back down.
Oh, look, I don't think so. All along, we've been guided by what's in the national interests. Jobs, industries, I mean, if they can't survive in a competitive global environment, there's no way that from a position of unemployment, from a position of economic weakness, we'll be able to make any impact at all on climate change.
Michael, for 6 months, your party has been saying it is implacably opposed to a 2010 start-up date.
And as
recently as yesterday, in an opinion piece in the Australian newspaper, Andrew Robb described a 2010 start-up date as reckless and a schmozzle. By last night, Malcolm Turnbull saying he's open to a 2010 start-up date, and we've got industry.
Look, the most
a lot
important
of
thing
industry
here-
people
the most-
actually saying.
Well, Michael, this is an interesting point because Malcolm Turnbull all year has been saying, I've got a quote here, he said, why would you want to build an emissions trading scheme in the dark? We need to know what the US is going to do. We need to know what the global international agreement is going to look like after Copenhagen. Those two factors don't seem to have changed in this white paper. We still have the Copenhagen meeting a year off and we're not sure what the US president will do at that meeting.
Look, I mean, all along, the Labor Party and Mr Rudd have been promising to the Australian people that they would be doing something very substantial in the interest of the country. And I think the reason why the reason why we're seeing the Greens attack the Labor government is because during the campaign, they promised the world to the Greens. I mean, we didn't see any protests when Mr Rudd was speaking during the election campaign, and now we're seeing the Greens attack the Labor government. So I think that indicates that, in fact, where the shift has happened is in the government side.
So what are you saying, Michael, that we should actually adopt the Greens position? This would be a new coalition position.
No, certainly not. In fact, I think you've actually moved closer to the opposition's position to be more responsible and to actually set targets which may be achievable.
Well, there's an endorsement from the coalition.
Well, Craig Emerson, the government has said
have some high pie-in-the-sky target, which you promised during the campaign and which you actually misled the people of Australia, I would say.
Well,
Craig Emerson, the government's all along has said that it's an ambition to introduce the scheme in the year 2010. Using the word ambition, there seems to be no guarantees that that will be the start date. What's the likelihood, do you think, that it could be delayed, especially if getting legislation through the Senate does seem to be dragged
That's right.
out?
You point to a very real constraint. We will do everything we can. That's why we describe it as an ambition. But it doesn't need a rocket scientist to calculate that we do not have a majority in the Senate. The Greens are obviously implacably opposed to the policy that was released just yesterday. We need, therefore, the coalition support on this, and I don't know whether we'll get it or not because they do change their position one day to the next. Can I say something very quickly about the Greens' position, though? Christine Milne has said, well, this is the end of the Great Barrier Reef. Well, let's just do a little bit of arithmetic. We actually contribute, that is Australia, a little over 1% of global emissions. If we stopped emitting overnight, if we shut down Australia, 99% of emissions would still go into the atmosphere. So Christine Milne's position is that the Australia's 1% is what's killing the Great Barrier Reef, not the world's 99%. Now, we can't, deal constructively with that kind of false logic.
Okay, well, I'm sure that's an argument that's going to rage for some time. We are running out of time, though. I do need to move on to the